I never thought I'd be sitting here writing this kind of story, but life has a way of throwing you into the deepest pits when you least expect it. I was married to Sarah for 5 years. She was the woman I trusted with my life, the one I thought I knew inside out. We had a decent life, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I worked as a mechanic, fixing engines and cars, while she kept busy with her freelance graphic design. We didn't have kids, but somehow that made our bond feel even more solid, or so I thought. Everything changed the day I lost my job. It was a brutal blow. My shop shut down unexpectedly. The owner ran off with the money, and I was left staring at my empty bank account, feeling useless and broken. I spent weeks trying to find something new, but the market was brutal. No calls, no callbacks. The whole world seemed to conspire against me. I was sitting on the couch, staring at the wall, feeling the weight of failure crush my chest when Sarah started acting weird. She became distant almost overnight. Usually, she'd come home, cook dinner, ask about my day, but suddenly she was glued to her phone, disappearing into the bedroom for hours at a time. I noticed her trying to hide her screen when I entered the room. She'd quickly shove her phone face down or lock it. That was my first red flag, but I choked it down, telling myself I was just paranoid. She was stressed. She was upset about my job situation. Everyone reacts differently under pressure, right? Then came the small things that started to bother me more. Late-night texts, quick glances over her shoulder when I entered the room, discussions in hushed tones with her friends about what's next. I brushed it off, convinced I was overthinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My stomach was tied in knots at work day after day, feeling like I was spiraling. I told myself, stay calm, she loves you. Maybe she's just worried about us. Until one day I found her phone lying on the sofa, unlocked. I was half asleep, exhausted from a long day, but I couldn't resist peeking. My heart pounded as I flipped it open. That's when I saw it. Texts, not just innocent flirtation, but plans to run away. With him, my best friend Mark. They were talking about how they couldn't wait to leave everything behind, how they'd escape together and start fresh somewhere else. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. I stared at the screen, cold sweat running down my back. My hands trembled. My mind refused to believe it at first. That can't be true. Not Mark. Not someone I trusted like a brother. I scrolled through more messages. The details were clear. They had already made decisions: pick a place, pack a bag, meet up tonight. I felt the world tilt beneath me. My palms turned clammy and my stomach lurched. I wanted to shout, to scream, but all I did was stare blankly, processing. I had suspected something was off, sure, but seeing it in writing in their own words, that was a different level of betrayal. That wasn't just flirting or a fleeting mistake. It was planning their escape behind my back right after I lost everything. My mind raced. How could Sarah do this? How could Mark? I felt a hot rage building, but beneath that, a sharp, icy coldness took over. I knew this wasn't just about heartbreak. It was about revenge. I had to think. I couldn't just let this go. I needed a plan, something calculated, something that would make them regret betraying me so deeply. I closed her phone, feeling my fingers tremble. The room seemed darker now, shadows crawling along the walls. I sat there, staring at nothing, feeling the heavy weight of betrayal pressing down on me. The very people I trusted most had turned into strangers, liars, thieves, and cowards. I told myself I'd find a way to make them pay, not with violence but with something smarter. A plan that would strip them of their false sense of security, show them I wasn't as helpless as I looked. I had nothing left to lose, so I would take everything from them piece by piece. If they wanted to run away and leave me broken, then I'd be the one to make sure they couldn't escape unscathed. And that was just the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to those messages on her phone. Every word, every plan burned into my head like a brand. I didn't want to just confront her blindly. No. I needed to be smart about this. If I was going to make them pay, I had to understand what I was dealing with. I had to plan it out meticulously. The first thing I did was search her belongings for any clues. I knew she'd hide some evidence, so I turned the house upside down, checking drawers, hidden compartments, even the trash. Nothing obvious at first, but I didn't expect to find her plans outright. What I did find was a receipt from a nearby hotel, tucked into her purse. That was it. The confirmation I needed. She was planning the escape that very night. My stomach twisted, but I kept my face calm. I had to stay composed. If I lost control now, I'd blow everything. Instead, I went to my computer and started working on a plan. I needed to find a way to catch them in the act to make sure they couldn't deny it later. I had to be careful. I couldn't just storm in. I had to catch them in the act, proof that would leave no room for doubt. I set up some fake messages, pretending to be someone else, to lure Mark into revealing. More, I even created a fake online profile, pretending I was interested in meeting up with him to see if I could get him to slip up. It was a risky move, but I wanted to know for sure what was happening. I kept my phone close, ready to record anything that might come up. I knew if I caught them red-handed, I'd have the leverage I needed. Over the next few hours, I monitored their plans. Mark was just as eager as Sarah, talked about meeting at the hotel, how they'd finally start their new life away from everything else. My blood boiled. I could feel it in my chest, a mixture of betrayal and fury. They thought they could just walk away, leaving me behind, broken, and I was supposed to just accept it. No way. I'd make sure they'd regret this forever. I started drafting a message, one that would lay everything out. Something cold, precise. No threats, no yelling, just facts. I know everything. Don't try to deny it. I planned to send it as soon as I had everything set up. That way, I'd have the upper hand when I confronted them face to face. Next step was crucial. I couldn't just show up unannounced and risk ruining everything. I needed a way to catch them in the act. So I arranged for a friend, someone I trusted, to be waiting nearby with a camera, not to attack but to record them in the moment. I told him to keep quiet and not interfere unless absolutely necessary. As I prepared everything, I felt a strange mixture of adrenaline and dread. This wasn't just about catching a cheating wife. This was about justice. About reclaiming what was mine. I knew once I made my move, there was no turning back. Sarah and Mark had betrayed me in the worst way, and I was going to make sure they paid the price. Finally, I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. The messages were flowing. They were almost ready to leave. All I had to do now was wait. Every second felt like an eternity. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. My ears were ringing with anticipation. The moment was coming. And when it did, everything would change. I was ready to confront them, to unveil their lies, and to destroy the illusion they had built around themselves. I knew exactly what I'd say. I knew exactly how I'd make them regret every second of their betrayal. I just needed to let the clock run out. The question was, could I hold myself together long enough? The night finally arrived, and I could feel my pulse pounding harder with every minute that ticked by. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. I had everything set. The camera hidden at the hotel, my phone ready to send that damning message, and my mind focused on what I'd say when I finally confronted them. My palms were sweaty and a cold sweat trickled down my forehead. I kept telling myself, stay calm, stay in control. I kept glancing at the clock, heart hammering in my chest. This was the moment I'd been planning for hours, maybe even days. I knew they'd try to slip away quietly, thinking they were clever. But I wanted to catch them red-handed, to make sure there was no denying what they'd done. I was tired of the lies, the betrayal, that sick feeling in my gut that refused to go away. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was the alert from the hidden camera. They were on the move. I could see Sarah's silhouette through the window, her suitcase in hand, Mark walking behind her. They looked nervous but determined. My stomach twisted violently. I felt like I was about to explode. I grabbed my phone and started typing the message I'd been planning. I know everything, don't try to deny it. It was blunt, but it needed to hit hard. I pressed send just as I heard the front door creak open. My heart leapt into my throat. They were leaving. I slowly moved toward the door, trying to keep my breathing even. I saw Sarah step out first, looking over her shoulder as if she was expecting me to jump out and stop her. Mark followed, carrying her bag, both of them trying to act casual but failing miserably. The fake calm, the false confidence, they were scared and I loved it. I stepped onto the porch, my voice steady but cold. Going somewhere. I said loud enough to make sure they heard me. Sarah froze for a second, her face draining of color. Mark's eyes widened, and I saw the shock in his expression. They didn't expect me to be standing there waiting. That gave me the advantage. Sarah's voice trembled when she answered, "It's none of your business. Leave us alone." She tried to brush past me, but I blocked her way. I could feel the heat rising in my ears, the anger bubbling over. I reached out and grabbed her arm gently but firmly. "Oh, I think it's very much my business. You see, I've got proof now. Real proof." Mark stepped closer, trying to look confident but failing. "Look, man, we're just saving us all a lot of time," I interrupted, voice low but sharp. "You two planned to run away, didn't you? Leave me here broken and betrayed. Well, I've got everything recorded. The messages, the plans, the proof that you're trying to disappear." I kept my eyes locked onto theirs, feeling my fists clenched tightly at my sides. Sarah's mouth opened, then closed, trying to come up with some excuse. I could see the flicker of panic in her eyes. I didn't care. I kept talking, voice rising a little. "You thought you could just walk out, forget about me, after everything? No way, you're not getting away with this." Mark looked like he wanted to say something, but I cut him off. "I've already sent the messages. The whole world's going to see what you've been planning." I took a step back, pulling out my phone to show them the confirmation message I'd sent to myself. "You're done." They stared at me, silent, their faces a mix of guilt and shock. I saw Sarah's hands trembling as she tried to reach for her bag. I was enjoying this moment, this feeling of control I'd fought so hard to regain. I wasn't just confronting them, I was making damn sure they understood I wasn't weak, that I wouldn't be pushed aside anymore. Then I handed her the phone. "You see this? This is your proof. You're not going anywhere tonight, not until we have a proper talk." I watched her eyes flicker with fear, knowing I'd caught her out. Mark looked at me, defeated, and finally muttered, "You win." That's when I knew I had what I wanted. No more games, no more lies. I was finally taking my power back, and I was going to make damn sure. They knew it. The night had just begun. The weight of what I'd just done settled on me like a stone in my stomach. I never thought I'd be that guy, standing in my own doorway, confronting my wife and her supposed best friend like some kind of villain. But the way they looked at me, defeated, guilty, it felt like I finally took control of a situation I'd been losing grip on. I told Sarah to sit on the porch step. Her face was pale, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and fear. Mark was standing just behind her, shoulders slumped, avoiding eye contact. I didn't need to say much. They already knew they'd been caught. I just wanted to hear their excuses, see how deep this mess went. "You thought I wouldn't find out," I said flatly, voice cold. "You planned your escape right under my nose. How long?" My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed forward. "How long were you two planning this?" Sarah looked down at her hands, then finally spoke, her voice trembling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We didn't mean to hurt you, we were just—" She hesitated, searching for words. "We were just tired of everything, your job, the stress. Mark said he'd help me start fresh. I swear I didn't want to hurt you." Mark nodded, adding, "We were both stupid. We thought we could just leave and start over somewhere else. We didn't think about how you'd feel, how betrayed you'd be." His voice was sincere, but it didn't matter anymore. I listened, my jaw clenched so tight I thought it might break. The last thing I wanted was their apologies. I wanted them to understand how badly they'd screwed me over, how I'd been left feeling worthless, abandoned. My vision blurred with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "Start over," I echoed, voice rising. "You think leaving me behind is starting fresh? You're wrong, that's just cowardice, running away from your problems instead of facing them." I wanted to scream, but I kept my voice steady. "And Mark, you're supposed to be my friend. How could you do this to me, after everything?" Mark looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. "I didn't want to hurt you either, I just thought—" "You thought what, Mark? That it was okay to betray me like I was nothing, that your friendship meant nothing?" I clenched my fists, feeling the adrenaline surge. "You're supposed to be my best man, my brother, and you're planning to run off with my wife. That's what I get for trusting you." Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears now. She looked genuinely torn, but I knew that didn't erase what they'd done. Not even close. I stepped closer, voice dropping into a cold whisper. "You're not leaving tonight. Not until I get some answers. And I want you both to understand something. You're not just walking away from me. You're walking away from everything we ever had. I don't know if I can ever trust either of you again." They said nothing for a moment, just staring at their feet. I could see the guilt in their eyes, but that didn't make me feel better. It just made me angrier. I knew I had to end this now, to make sure they understood the consequences of their betrayal. "I'm calling the police." I finally said, pulling out my phone. Not because I want to ruin your lives, but because I need to make sure this doesn't happen again. You're leaving. Me no choice. My fingers trembled as I hit the call button, the sound of the dial tone loud in the quiet night. Sarah reached out, her voice pleading, "Please don't do this. We're sorry. We didn't mean to hurt you." "Sorry doesn't cut it," I snapped. "You lied. You planned to leave, and now you're going to face the consequences." I felt my jaw tighten even more. I felt the rage boil over, replaced by a cold sense of finality. As I waited for the police, I watched Mark and Sarah exchange glances, knowing the damage was done. They'd pushed me to the edge, and I wasn't backing down. Not anymore. I'd finally taken control of my life, and I wouldn't let them take it from me again. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, pulling me back into the harsh reality of what I was doing. But I didn't care. I looked them both in the eyes one last time. "Get your stuff," I said, "and leave. Whatever you do from here, just remember, you betrayed someone who trusted you with everything, and I'll never forget that." As they gathered their things, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Betrayal cuts deep, but sometimes you have to cut even deeper to heal. And that's exactly what I was going to do. The police arrived just as Sarah was stuffing her last bag into her car. Mark was already outside, sitting on the steps with his head bowed, guilt etched into every line of his face. I stood there watching, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. It was finally over, or so I told myself. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about ending a betrayal. It was about starting to rebuild what was broken. The officers took their statements, and I handed over the evidence, the messages, the hotel receipt, everything I had recorded. They looked at me quietly, their expressions unreadable. One of the officers, a woman with sharp eyes, said, "You did the right thing. We'll handle the rest." She glanced at Sarah and Mark, then at me. "You're going to be okay." I wanted to believe that, really I did. But my chest still ached and my mind kept replaying every moment. I felt the weight of it all. The betrayal, the loss of trust, the feeling that I'd been punched in the gut so hard I'd never fully recover. Still, I knew I had to move forward. Sarah climbed into her car, looking back at me with tear-filled eyes. She tried to say something but stopped herself. I just stared at her, feeling nothing but cold. Mark looked up, meeting my gaze for a second before lowering his head again. I didn't say a word. I just watched them drive off, the taillights disappearing into the darkness. Once the police left, I finally allowed myself to breathe. I went back inside, feeling hollow, like I'd lost a piece of myself. I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on the couch, and stared at the empty space where Sarah used to sit. My skin felt numb, but my mind was racing. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How had I let things spiral so far? I realized I'd been living in a fog, ignoring all the red flags. All those little signs, her secretive phone habits, her distant attitude. I'd been so wrapped up in trying to hold us together that I missed the warning signs. I'd trusted, and trust had been shattered. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I also knew one thing: I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. I was done with their lies, their betrayal. From now on, I was going to rebuild my life, no matter how hard that was. I'd lost a lot, but I still had myself, and that was more than enough to start over. The next morning, I woke up feeling a strange calm. I got up, looked around the house, and decided it was time to take control. I started packing away things that reminded me of her: pictures, gifts, anything that kept her presence alive in this house. I grabbed a box, carefully wrapped her wedding ring, and placed it inside. Not to forget, but to remind myself that I was done with pretending. I also made a list. First, I was going to change the locks. No more keys for her or Mark. Then I'd start looking for a fresh place to live, somewhere I could breathe again. I called a few friends, told them what had happened, and surprisingly, they offered support and a place to stay if I needed it. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was taking back some control. That afternoon, I went to a local agency and signed the paperwork for a new apartment. It was modest, but it was mine. Something I could make into a home again. I handed over the keys to the landlord and stared at the empty space in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. As I packed the last of my things into my car, I looked back at the house, my house, and took a deep breath. This was the end of a chapter filled with betrayal and pain, but it was also the beginning of something new. I knew I'd have to heal to rebuild trust in myself, but I was ready. The lesson was clear: trust carefully and never ignore the signs when they start to pile up. When people betray you, you can't just sweep it under the rug. Sometimes the only way to move forward is to cut yourself free, no matter how painful it might be. I drove off that day, leaving the past behind. And as I looked out at the road ahead, I knew one thing for certain: I was done being a victim. From now on, I was going to be the one in control. The first few days in the new apartment were surreal. I felt like I was floating between numbness and a strange sense of liberation. Every item I packed away, every step I took towards reclaiming my space, was a small victory. It wasn't easy, far from it. There were moments I'd catch myself staring at the empty walls, remembering what I'd lost. But slowly, I started to rebuild the pieces of myself that betrayal had shattered. One evening, I sat on the balcony of my new place, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The air was colder than I expected, but it didn't bother me much. I took a deep breath, feeling the chill tighten my lungs, and finally allowed myself to think clearly. I thought about Sarah, Mark, and the years of trust I'd handed out so freely. I'd been naive, maybe even stupid, but I learned my lesson the hard way. I thought about the pain, the anger, and how I'd spent so long feeling like I was drowning in it. Now I felt different. Not healed, maybe, but stronger. I'd taken control of my life, and I'd proved to myself that I could survive the worst. That night, I promised myself I wouldn't let bitterness consume me. Instead, I'd use this experience as a lesson, something that would make me wiser, more cautious, but also more resilient. The truth is, betrayal cuts deep. It makes you question everything: your judgment, your worth, your faith in others. But it also forces you to confront your own strength. I realized that I'd been so busy trying to hold everything together, my relationship, my job, my self-esteem, that I'd ignored the warning signs. Now I knew better. Never again would I ignore the red flags, no matter how much I loved someone. Trust is earned, not given blindly. Looking back, I see how far I've come. I'm not perfect now, and I still have scars. But I also have a new sense of independence, a fierce determination to keep myself safe and true to what I deserve. I've learned that sometimes the only way to truly move on is to cut loose what's holding you down, to walk away, even if it hurts, and to never look back with regret. To anyone reading this who's going through something similar, know that betrayal can destroy you if you let it, but you also have the power to rebuild, to start again. It's not about forgetting, but about learning to live despite the pain. Trust can be rebuilt, but only when you're ready. Until then, focus on yourself. Protect your heart, your peace, and your boundaries. Don't rush the healing. Take your time. The last thing I want you to remember is this: sometimes the greatest revenge is living well without them, moving forward, finding happiness, and never letting betrayal define you. I walked away from that house with nothing but a heavy heart and a clear mind. Now I stand here, stronger and more aware. I'm not perfect, but I'm free. And that's the best revenge I could ask for.